Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty massive.
Yeah, monumental, really.
Right. So when we revisit a text with the cultural footprint of Herman Melville's Moby-Dick, the challenge isn't familiarizing you with the narrative. I mean, you already know the trajectory.
Exactly. You know the white whale, you know the obsession of Captain Ahab.
And you know the catastrophic conclusion.
Right, the guy chasing the big whale. It's a cultural cliche at this point.
It really is. But our mission today is to look completely beyond that cliche. We are going to deconstruct the architecture of the novel's opening.
Specifically, those framing devices right at the start.
Yeah, the etymology, the extracts, and the first 24 chapters. Because if you treat these opening sections merely as a prologue to a fishing expedition,
You're missing the point entirely.
you are missing one of the most radical philosophical treatises, most biting sociological satires, and most profound psychological roadmaps in American literature.
It's custom-tailored for anyone who has ever felt that crushing weight of societal expectation, or just the urge to leave everything behind.
Okay, let's unpack this. You might think you know this story, but the sheer weirdness, the laugh-out-loud buddy comedy moments, and the stunning insights into human nature in these first 24 chapters will completely change how you see it.
The structural audacity of the novel is apparent before the narrative even begins. We have to reckon with the archival apparatus Melville constructs at the threshold of the text.
Which a lot of people just skip over.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe.
Most modern editions retain the etymology and the extracts, and readers are just so eager to get to Ishmael that they skim them.
Or ignore them entirely.
Right. But looking closely at this preliminary matter, Melville is actively destabilizing your epistemological footing right out of the gate.
He presents us with this late consumptive usher to a grammar school.
Yes. A figure who is literally dying. He's dusting off old lexicons to teach us the word for whale in 13 different languages.
From Hebrew to Aramangoan. And the imagery of the consumptive usher is doing incredible thematic work.
How so?
Well, consumption, or tuberculosis, is a wasting disease. This usher is coughing his life away while desperately trying to categorize the Leviathan through the rigid, completely inadequate structures of human grammar.
It's the futility of trying to master the infinite through pure academics.
Exactly. The usher is wiping the dust off his dictionaries, but he is fundamentally made of dust himself.
Oh, that's good. And then Melville hands the baton to the sub-librarian.
A title so layered in bureaucratic insignificance it's almost Kafkaesque.
It really is.
Yeah.
The sub-librarian is this brilliant parody of 19th century empiricism and the whole archival impulse of the era.
Because it was an era obsessed with taxonomy, right?
Yeah.
With cataloging the natural world.
Precisely. The sub-librarian has seemingly scoured the long Vaticans and street stalls of the earth to compile this massive higgledy-piggledy list of quotations about whales.
And it's from everywhere. We get excerpts from Genesis,
Joby.
Darwin, Thomas Jefferson, Captain Cook, all the way down to a New England primer.
And what's fascinating here is how it flattens the hierarchy of texts entirely.
By placing a nursery rhyme right next to the Book of Job.
Right. Melville asserts that all human attempts to articulate the majesty or the terror of the whale are equally inadequate.
Yet equally necessary.
Yes. By showing us the whale through the lens of history, religion, and literature before the narrative even begins, the text establishes the Leviathan not just as an animal, but as a mythical, omnipresent force haunting the human subconscious.
You cannot capture the whale in a net of words, but you are absolutely compelled to try.
And that compulsion is the engine of the entire novel. Once we cross the threshold of this archival graveyard, we are hit with the famous opening of Chapter 1, Loomings.
Call me Ishmael.
But the focus shouldn't just be on the pseudonym. It should be on the clinical precision with which Ishmael diagnoses his own psychological state.
Yeah, he doesn't go to sea for adventure.
Or the romantic sublime. He goes to sea as a medical intervention for profound paralyzing depression,
He describes it as having a damp, drizzly November in his soul.
which is a masterful articulation of existential dread, written decades before the term even existed.
His symptoms are hyperspecific, too. He finds himself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses.
Bringing up the rear of every funeral he meets.
The most striking symptom, though, is his sudden, violent irritability. He admits it requires a strong moral principle to prevent him from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off.
That image, knocking hats off, is a visceral rejection of polite bourgeois society.
Because the hat was the ultimate symbol of 19th century propriety and social standing.
Exactly. Ishmael feels this overwhelming urge to violently dismantle that artifice. His depression isn't just a melancholic lethargy. It is an active, aggressive alienation from the civilized world.
He explicitly frames his decision to go to sea as a substitute for a pistol and ball.
He contrasts his choice with Cato the Younger.
Right. Cato threw himself upon his sword with a philosophical flourish, choosing death over submitting to Caesar.
Ishmael says he quietly takes to the ship.
The ship is his suicide, but it's a social suicide rather than a biological one. He is obliterating his identity on land to save his physical life.
But he doesn't just present this as a personal pathology. He immediately pivots to argue that this urge, this magnetic draw toward the watery margins of the world, is a universal human condition.
And he paints an incredibly vivid sociological portrait of Manhattan to prove it. He directs your attention to the Battery on a dreamy Sabbath afternoon,
Describing thousands of mortal men, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks, just standing like silent sentinels gazing out at the ocean.
It is a devastating critique of the early industrial capitalist machine. And we
Right.
want to be clear here, we're just reporting Melville's critique of the era, not endorsing a specific political stance ourselves.
Of course. But the text is definitely pointing out that these clerks and laborers are physically immobilized by their economic roles all week.
And the moment they have a day of rest, their instinct is to push themselves to the absolute limit of the solid earth and stare into the abyss.
Melville's language here emphasizes the violence of their economic captivity. Nailed to benches invokes a crucifixion of the working class.
And why do they stare at the water? Ishmael argues that water is the ultimate mirror.
He invokes the Greek myth of Narcissus, who plunged into the fountain and drowned because he couldn't grasp the tormenting, mild image he saw there.
Ishmael concludes that this image is the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all.
The Narcissus illusion elevates the narrative from a physical journey to an epistemological crisis. When we look into the ocean, we are looking into the void of our own existence.
Yearning for that phantom. But the people on the Battery are too tethered to the shore to pursue it.
While Ishmael, having reached the terminal velocity of his depression, cuts the tether. He dives into the fountain.
But his descent into the maritime world is highly calculated. He insists on going to sea specifically as a simple sailor.
Right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle.
He actively rejects the roles of passenger, captain, or commodore. Passengers, he notes, have to pay, and the act of paying brings on a kind of seasick quarrelsomeness.
Captains have the burden of command and the illusion of control.
Ishmael seeks the absolute bottom of the hierarchy because he recognizes the inherent absurdity of the hierarchy itself.
He anticipates the judgment of his peers, too, especially considering his background as a schoolmaster, a figure of localized authority.
How does a man who used to make tall boys stand in awe suddenly submit to the indignity of being ordered to sweep the decks by a grumpy sea captain?
He neutralizes this indignity through a radical, almost subversive application of stoicism.
He asks, "Who ain't a slave? Tell me that." He democratizes human indignity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, every single person is taking orders, either from a boss, a physical necessity, or the whims of the universe itself.
He calls it the universal thump. Since the thump is passed round, all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content.
It's a masterclass in Stoic philosophy. If the Archangel Gabriel doesn't think less of him for taking an order, why should his ego suffer?
If you voluntarily strip away your own ego and accept your position at the bottom of the wheel, the indignities of the world lose their power to wound you.
Furthermore, there's a sly economic pragmatism embedded in his Stoicism. He notes the monumental difference between paying and being paid.
He subjects himself to the captain's orders, but the act of receiving a wage flips the power dynamic in his own mind.
He also relishes the physical vitality of the forecastle, joking that the Commodore on the quarterdeck only breathes the air secondhand after the common sailors have had the first gasp of it.
Ishmael is finding liberation through absolute submission.
And this philosophy perfectly prepares him for his arrival in New Bedford.
Which brings us to the second section of our outline, chapters 2 through 6 and 10 through 13. Ishmael's worldview is aggressively tested at the Spouter Inn.
The transition here is jarring. We move from high-minded proto-existentialism to a gritty, atmospheric nightmare.
That steadily morphs into a profound subversion of 19th century racial and cultural boundaries.
The atmosphere of New Bedford on that freezing December Saturday night is intensely oppressive. Ishmael is wandering through blocks of blackness.
He misses the ferry to Nantucket, and his lack of funds prevents him from entering the warm, inviting taverns like the Crossed Harpoons.
Instead, he finds himself drawn to a dilapidated structure that looks like it was carted from the ruins of a burnt district.
And notice the subtle continuation of the death motif here. He left Manhattan to avoid coffin warehouses, and the proprietor of this dreary inn is named Peter Coffin.
The universe is playfully tormenting him with his own morbid fixations.
The interior of the Spouter Inn is a masterclass in atmospheric foreshadowing. In the entryway, Ishmael is confronted by a massive, centuries-old, besmoked oil painting.
The painting is so dark, chaotic, and heavily varnished that Ishmael cannot immediately comprehend it. He has to study it from various angles, using crosslights to decipher its contents.
He initially posits it might be the Black Sea in a midnight gale, or perhaps the unnatural combat of the four primal elements.
The painting operates as a meta-commentary on the novel itself. Melville is instructing you, the reader, on how to interpret Moby-Dick.
You cannot look at the narrative head-on and expect a clear, linear image.
Exactly. You have to use crosslights, approaching it through different philosophical, religious, and scientific lenses.
Eventually, Ishmael discerns the image. A Cape Horner ship in a hurricane with a gigantic, exasperated whale in the act of impaling itself upon the ship's three mastheads.
It is a vision of mutual annihilation, prefiguring the fate of the Pequod.
Beyond the painting, the architecture of the inn continues to blur the lines between the human and the Leviathan. The bar itself is constructed inside the vast arched jawbone of a right whale.
And the bartender, a withered little old man nicknamed Jonah, sells cheap, poisonous liquor from deceitful green glasses.
Ishmael has stepped into the belly of the beast before he has even seen the ocean. And it is in this claustrophobic, ominous setting that he is forced into the most intimate encounter of his life.
The introduction of Queequeg is one of the most meticulously paced, comedic and thematic sequences in literature.
The ultimate buddy comedy begins here. The inn is full, and Coffin informs Ishmael he must share a bed with the harpooneer.
And then the landlord begins this psychological torture campaign. He casually mentions that the harpooneer is out peddling and might be late because he is struggling to sell his head.
Ishmael's reaction is a brilliant display of bourgeois panic. He assumes the landlord is spinning a yarn or that the harpooneer is a madman wandering the streets with a fractured skull.
When Coffin finally clarifies that the harpooneer is selling embalmed New Zealand heads, shrunken heads, and is trying to close a sale on a Saturday night because Sunday is the Sabbath, the satire reaches a fever pitch.
Melville is skewering the hypocrisy of the marketplace. The buying and selling of human remains is perfectly acceptable under the laws of commerce, provided it doesn't violate the arbitrary rules of the Christian calendar.
It highlights the macabre realities of the global whaling trade, which brought these artifacts into New England parlors.
Ishmael's terror is palpable. He retreats to a freezing, unfurnished room occupied only by a papered fireboard, some bonefish hooks, and a tall harpoon.
He climbs into bed and waits in the dark, and the subsequent arrival of Queequeg is framed entirely through Ishmael's prejudiced, terrified gaze.
Queequeg enters holding a candle and the shrunken head, completely unaware of Ishmael cowering under the quilt.
Ishmael's description focuses entirely on Queequeg's otherness. He notes the dark, purplish-yellow complexion, the large, blackish squares of tattoos that make him look like a mildewed skull,
and the absence of hair, save for a scalp knot. To Ishmael, a product of conservative Protestant America, he is trapped in a room with an abominable savage.
But Melville rapidly deflates this terror through Queequeg's completely mundane and methodical nighttime routine, which just happens to be culturally alien to Ishmael.
Queequeg takes out a deformed black wooden idol, Yojo, sets it up in the fireplace, and begins a ritualistic offering involving a sacrificial blaze of shavings and a burnt ship biscuit.
He sings pagan psalmody. To Ishmael, this is pure demonic sorcery.
The climax hits when Queequeg finishes his prayers, lights his tomahawk pipe, and jumps into bed with the weapon still between his teeth,
leading to Ishmael screaming and the landlord intervening.
But the brilliance of the scene lies in the immediate aftermath. Once the situation is explained to Queequeg in broken English, his reaction is entirely measured and polite.
He doesn't attack. He accommodates. He rolls over to the edge of the bed and motions for Ishmael to join him.
This is the pivot point for Ishmael's worldview. He looks at Queequeg and realizes the tattoos are merely superficial. Beneath the ink, Queequeg is clean, comely, and fundamentally decent.
Notice the brilliant subversion of expectations here. Ishmael realizes better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian.
It's a profound commentary on prejudice. And the execution of this realization is flawless. Ishmael turns in and notes he never slept better in my life.
When morning breaks, the intimacy between them has escalated dramatically. Ishmael wakes to find Queequeg's arm thrown over him in a loving, affectionate, bridegroom-like embrace.
The imagery is deliberately marital and intensely physical, completely obliterating the boundaries of race, religion, and traditional masculinity.
The morning sequence continues to play with cultural relativity. Ishmael observes Queequeg's bizarre routine,
Putting on his tall beaver hat before crawling under the bed to put on his boots.
followed by the act of lathering his face with hard soap and shaving his cheeks with the razor-sharp edge of his harpoon.
To Ishmael, it's absurd, but it functions perfectly for Queequeg. Melville is demonstrating that civilized behaviors are largely arbitrary constructs.
We see this stark contrast highlighted at the breakfast table.
Oh, the breakfast scene is fantastic. The public room is filled with fierce, burly whalemen who have battled monsters on the open ocean.
Yet, in the domestic setting of the inn, these civilized men are repressed, bashful, and profoundly uncomfortable. They eat in sheepish silence.
Queequeg, conversely, sits at the head of the table, entirely unbothered by social anxiety. He coolly uses his harpoon to spear beefsteaks from across the table.
He is the only authentic individual in the room, and this authenticity draws Ishmael completely into Queequeg's orbit.
Becoming bosom friends, their bonding is rapid and absolute. They share a smoke from the tomahawk pipe, a symbolic communion that bridges their cultures.
Queequeg divides his worldly wealth, $30 in silver, equally with Ishmael. He presses his forehead to Ishmael's and declares them married.
In Queequeg's cultural framework, this means they are permanently bound, obligated to die for one another if necessary.
Ishmael accepts this bond unconditionally. But the true test of this union occurs when Queequeg prepares his wooden idol, Yojo, for evening prayers.
This raises an important question. What is true religion? Ishmael, raised a strict Presbyterian, is forced into a theological reckoning.
He has to decide whether participating in Queequeg's ritual constitutes a mortal sin or a profound act of grace. The logical framework he builds to justify his participation is one of the most radical pieces of religious philosophy published in the 19th century.
He begins with first principles. He asks himself, what is the will of God?
He determines that the will of God is encapsulated in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you.
He then applies this to his immediate context. What does he wish Queequeg would do for him? He wishes Queequeg would join him in his Presbyterian form of worship.
Therefore, logically and morally, to align himself with the will of God, Ishmael concludes he must join Queequeg in his worship of the wooden idol.
It's an incredibly radical, inclusive view of spirituality. Ishmael literally helps prop up the idol, offers the burnt biscuit, salams before it, and kisses its nose.
He transcends dogmatic theology to achieve a universal brotherhood based on mutual empathy. Melville is actively dismantling the exclusivity of Christian salvation,
arguing that innate nobility and moral action are far more important than the specific geometry of one's altar.
and we see this innate nobility reinforced through Queequeg's backstory.
We learn he is a prince, the son of a high chief on the island of Rokovoko.
He stowed away on a passing ship, driven by an intellectual curiosity to learn the ways of Christendom to better his own people.
But seeing the systemic cruelty, greed, and wickedness of Christian sailors deeply disillusioned him. He concluded that the civilized world was fundamentally corrupt, and he chose to remain a pagan.
Preserving his own moral center, and Queequeg constantly demonstrates this moral superiority, often framed through physical comedy.
But the story of the wheelbarrow, he didn't know how to use it, so he just carried the whole thing.
Or the pompous sea captain visiting his island for a wedding feast. The captain, trying to demonstrate refined manners, mistakes a giant calabash of secret wedding punch for a finger bowl and washes his hands in it.
Queequeg uses this anecdote to prove that ignorance is entirely reciprocal. The savage is just as capable of laughing at the civilized man's blunders.
But the definitive proof of Queequeg's heroism occurs on the packet ship traveling from New Bedford to Nantucket.
The atmosphere on the ship is hostile. Several bumpkins are openly mocking Queequeg's appearance.
When one of them takes the mockery too far, Queequeg effortlessly flips the man high into the air, tapping his rear end before he lands.
A display of absolute physical dominance that is restrained, non-lethal, and entirely humiliating for the aggressor.
The captain of the packet ship is furious, threatening Queequeg. But moments later, a sudden squall hits.
The mainsail sheet parts, and a heavy rogue boom swings violently across the deck, sweeping that exact same mocking bumpkin overboard into the freezing, chaotic ocean.
The entire crew is paralyzed by the sudden violence of the storm. It is Queequeg who instantly takes command.
He secures the wildly swinging boom with a rope, stabilizing the ship. Then he strips off his heavy coat and dives directly into the freezing Atlantic.
He navigates the churning water, dives beneath the surface, and rescues the lifeless bumpkin. It is an act of pure, unhesitating heroism for a man who, moments before, treated him with intense racial animus.
And when Queequeg is pulled back aboard, he doesn't demand gratitude or expect a medal. He simply asks for fresh water to wash off the brine, puts on dry clothes, lights his pipe, and leans against the bulwarks.
He murmurs to himself, "It's a mutual, joint-stock world in all meridians. We cannibals must help these Christians."
That line is the thesis statement of their entire friendship. It exposes the moral bankruptcy of the civilized world while cementing Queequeg as the true moral center of the narrative.
This profound encounter with mortality and morality on the packet ship is perfectly prefigured by Ishmael's solitary experience back in New Bedford prior to their departure.
Which brings us to Section 3, Death, Faith, and the Belly of the Whale, Chapters 7 through 9.
Yes, before they ever board that packet ship, Ishmael visits the Whaleman's Chapel in New Bedford on a violent, sleet-driven Sunday morning.
The chapel is silent and somber. The congregation consists of sailors, wives, and widows, all sitting in isolated silence, their eyes fixed on a series of black-bordered marble tablets affixed to the walls.
What's fascinating here is Ishmael's shift in perspective. These tablets are cenotaphs, monuments to men lost at sea, men who have no graves.
He notes that the living try to hush the dead, but ultimately he reevaluates his own mortality. He reflects on the profound desolation of a grief that has no physical grave to tend.
The living desperately want to bury their dead to find closure, but the ocean denies them this comfort. Sitting in this chapel of unburied dead, contemplating the extreme statistical likelihood that he will join them, Ishmael experiences a massive philosophical shift.
He decides his body is just the lees of his better being.
He embraces a radical dualism. He reasons that if a whale destroys his body, it is only destroying a temporary vessel. The essence of who he is, his soul, remains untouchable.
To survive the existential terror of the whaling industry, one must completely sever their attachment to their own physical flesh.
This atmosphere of rigorous spiritual endurance sets the stage for the arrival of Father Mapple.
Mapple is a towering figure, a venerable, robust old man who spent his youth as a harpooneer. He enters the chapel shaking the sleet from his coat and approaches the pulpit.
But there are no stairs leading to the lectern. Instead, there is a perpendicular rope ladder, identical to the ones used to mount a ship from a small boat at sea.
Mapple climbs this ladder with the practiced ease of a veteran sailor. But the crucial detail is what he does once he reaches the top. He reaches down and pulls the rope ladder up behind him.
Ishmael interprets this not as a theatrical flourish, but as a profound theological statement. Pulling up the ladder represents spiritual isolation from worldly ties.
He is isolating himself from the congregation to speak a pure, uncompromised truth. Furthermore, the pulpit itself is shaped like a ship's bluff bows.
Ishmael deduces the symbolism here. The pulpit at the front represents how faith must face the storm of the world first. The prow of a ship is the first part to smash through the violent seas.
And Mapple's sermon fully utilizes this maritime flavor. He preaches on the book of Jonah, but he tells it like a sailor's yarn.
He describes Jonah skulking around the wharves of Joppa, looking like a fugitive. Jonah's trying to flee to Tarshish, mistakenly believing that a ship built by human hands can transport him beyond the jurisdiction of God.
Mapple focuses heavily on Jonah's guilt. He vividly illustrates how a guilty conscience warps a person's perception of physical reality.
He notes that Jonah pays triple the fare to secure passage. But the true terror begins when Jonah retreats to his tiny dark cabin.
The ship is heeled over by the wind, meaning the deck is slanted, but the swinging lamp hanging from the ceiling obeys gravity and hangs straight down.
Mapple imagines Jonah staring at this lamp in absolute horror. Jonah groans that the lamp hangs straight upwards, so it burns. But the chambers of his soul are all in crookedness.
The chambers of my soul are all in crookedness. It is a devastating articulation of internal misalignment.
Jonah's guilt has fractured his relationship with the physical world. And when the massive storm hits, Jonah is fast asleep.
Mapple compares this to the sleep of a man bleeding to death. It is the heavy, paralyzing sleep of severe clinical depression, echoing the exact condition that drove Ishmael to the sea in chapter 1.
When Jonah is thrown overboard, Maple drives home a two-stranded lesson.
The first strand is aimed at the congregation. Maple argues that true repentance isn't clamoring for pardon, but being grateful for just punishment.
When Jonah is in the belly of the whale, he accepts his fate. True repentance is the total acceptance of divine justice, however brutal.
The second strand is directed inward at Maple himself or any preacher or pilot of God.
Maple asserts that Jonah's true sin was cowardice. He fled because he was terrified of the hostility of the wicked city. Maple thunders, "Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall."
You must speak truth to falsehood, no matter the personal cost.
Maple's sermon perfectly mirrors Ishmael's own journey and foreshadows the impending clash with Captain Ahab. It's a masterclass in psychological storytelling.
With that heavy theological framework established, the narrative pivots sharply as Ishmael and Queequeg finally make their way to Nantucket, which brings us to section 4.
Nantucket, Chowder, and the Pequod, chapters 14 through 18. We move from the metaphysical weight of the chapel to the gritty economic reality of Nantucket Island.
Melville dedicates chapter 14 to mythologizing Nantucket. He recounts the Native American legend of the eagle and the infant that led to the island's discovery.
An eagle carried off an infant, and the desperate parents followed the eagle in their canoes, discovering the island only to find their child's skeleton. A bleak origin story.
And the island itself is so sandy they joke about planting weeds. Small clams attach themselves to the furniture.
Yet from this barren exile, these sea hermits own the ocean like emperors. They plow the ocean as if it were their own private plantation.
Before they can engage with this global empire, they stay at the Tripod's Inn, run by Hosea and Mrs. Hussey.
The comedic relief here is vital. As soon as they enter, Mrs. Hussey aggressively interrogates them, clam or cod.
The hilarious motif of chowder dominates their stay. Clam or cod for every meal. Ishmael vividly describes the clam chowder. It's so magnificent they immediately order the cod chowder to follow.
Ishmael expects fish bones to poke through his skin. Hosea Hussey's account books are bound in shark skin. Even the cow eats fish heads, and her milk tastes fishy.
And amid this comedy, Mrs. Hussey absolutely forbids Queequeg from taking his harpoon to his room because a previous boarder, Stiggs, was found dead with his own harpoon in his side.
A dark reminder that violence is woven into Nantucket life. The next morning, the serious business of picking a ship begins.
Yojo, the idol, dictates that Ishmael must pick the ship alone. He picks the Pequod.
The Pequod is a melancholy cannibal craft. It is heavily inlaid and adorned with whale bones and teeth instead of regular wood.
The open bulwarks are lined with huge, sharp whale teeth. The tiller is carved from a massive whale jaw. It is a floating charnel house.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The owners of this grim ship, Captain Peleg and Captain Bildad.
They are retired captains, Quakers, but fighting Quakers, who have spilled oceans of blood.
The dynamic between the two in the cabin is brilliant theater. Peleg is the aggressive, swearing, blustering one. Bildad is the gaunt, hyper-pious, stingy one incessantly reading his Bible.
When Ishmael attempts to negotiate his lay, his percentage of the voyage's profits, Bildad suggests the 777th lay.
An insulting, mathematically absurd fraction. Peleg explodes in theatrical rage and offers Ishmael the 300th lay.
And Bildad's response is the ultimate display of capitalist gaslighting.
He rebukes Peleg, arguing that paying Ishmael a fair wage is actually a moral failing. He claims a higher payout would rob widows and orphans.
It's a sharp critique of how piety can mask greed. He uses the hypothetical suffering of widows to justify maximizing corporate profit. We're just pointing out Melville's brilliant hypocrisy here.
Peleg plays the exasperated pragmatist, and Ishmael gets his 300th lay. But the real clash is signing Queequeg.
Bildad demands to know if Queequeg is a converted Christian. Ishmael argues Queequeg is a member of the first congregation of this whole worshipping world.
Peleg just wants to know if he can throw a harpoon. Queequeg bypasses the theology entirely.
He grabs his harpoon, vaults onto the bulwarks, and points to a microscopic drop of tar floating on the water far across the deck.
He hurls the harpoon directly over Bildad's broad-brimmed Quaker hat, hitting the tiny spot of tar flawlessly.
He instantly gets the 90th lay, a huge payout. Capitalism seamlessly absorbs the savage the moment his skills prove profitable.
Queequeg signs his name with an infinity symbol from his tattoos.
And Bildad, hilariously, still shoves a Christian tract into the pagan's hand as he leaves. The hypocrisy is absolute.
Which brings us to Section 5, Shadows, Omens, and the Unseen Captain Ahab, chapters 16, 19, 21, and 22.
We have spent an enormous amount of time preparing, and the central figure remains a ghost. When Ishmael asks to see the captain, Peleg's description does nothing to comfort him.
Peleg tells him Ahab is sick, keeps to himself, and lost his leg to a monstrous whale. He warns Ishmael that Ahab is a grand, ungodly, godlike man.
Ahab is presented as a mythic figure, and this anxiety is immediately weaponized by the introduction of Elijah.
A ragged, heavily scarred man on the docks. He operates as a classical Greek chorus.
He stops them and asks if they sign their souls away. He drops cryptic, terrifying hints about old thunder.
Did they hear about the 3 days he lay dead, or the deadly skirmish? He implies the loss of Ahab's leg wasn't just an accident, but the fulfillment of a dark prophecy.
What's fascinating here is the building of tension. We go 24 chapters without meeting the main character. Melville uses rumors, physical artifacts like the ship, and mad prophets to build the myth.
This paranoia colors the actual morning of their departure, dawn on Christmas morning.
A holiday symbolizing birth juxtaposed with a doomed voyage. Elijah accosts them one last time, asking if they saw phantom-like men boarding the ship.
On board, it's freezing. The casting off is a chaotic mix of the sacred and the profane.
Peleg is running around swearing violently and kicking sailors, while Bildad is sitting nearby singing sweet, mournful psalms.
The ship pushes into the freezing Atlantic, and Bildad tearfully gives his last-minute farewell warnings.
You'd expect profound spiritual advice, but it's incredibly mundane. Don't keep that cheese too long down in the hold. Beware of fornication.
It's the final gasp of domestic concern before the wildness of the ocean takes over.
And that transition plunges us into our final section today, Section 6, The Philosophy of the Deep and the Glory of Whaling, chapters 23 and 24.
Once the ship loses sight of land, Melville delivers 2 deeply philosophical chapters. Chapter 23, The Lee Shore, is just 6 paragraphs, but it's the ideological keystone.
Ishmael sees Bulkington, the sailor who just got back from a 4-year voyage, immediately steering the ship into another one.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lee shore is the land. During a violent storm, instinct tells you the shore represents safety.
But for a ship caught in that gale, the land is its direst jeopardy. It will crash against the rocks. The ship must fight the wind to stay in the chaotic, dangerous, deep ocean to survive.
This is Melville's metaphor for the human mind. The safe harbor represents unquestioned dogma and comfortable beliefs. True independence and highest truth are found only in the dangerous, shoreless infinite.
Not in safe, slavish comfort. He writes, "Terrors of the terrible, is all this agony so vain? The struggle for truth elevates the human spirit."
Following this metaphysical peak, chapter 24, The Advocate, grounds this in reality. Ishmael defends his profession.
People think whalemen are just dirty butchers, but Ishmael dismantles this hypocrisy. He asks why the world honors martial commanders who are butchers of human beings while reviling the men who harvest oil.
He points out that whalemen are explorers who mapped the unknown Pacific long before famous captains.
They opened global trade, fed starving colonies in Australia, and even helped liberate South American nations from Spain.
The whale ship is the true pioneer of the globe. It's a fierce defense demanding respect for the bloody labor required to maintain civilization's comforts.
So what does this all mean? We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've journeyed from a deep depression in Manhattan to a creepy inn into a profound cross-cultural friendship.
And out into the freezing philosophical depths of the Atlantic, all before the famous Captain Ahab even shows his face.
Melville has constructed an entire philosophical universe in the opening act alone. It fundamentally changes how you view the architecture of the book.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Think about that concept of the lee shore in the context of your own life.
Your own safe harbors.
Exactly. We all have safe harbors, our daily routines, our comfortable, unquestioned beliefs, the expectations of society. Those harbors provide warmth and safety. But as Ishmael and Melville pointed out, sometimes the very things that offer us comfort and safety are the things that will ultimately shipwreck our potential.
That's a powerful realization.
What is the deep, dangerous, shoreless truth that you are avoiding by clinging to your safe harbor? What is the howling infinite you are afraid to navigate? Are you ready to cut the anchor and steer your mind directly into the storm? Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive. We wish you fair winds on your own voyages of discovery.